The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning, cream-colored and heavy, bearing the unmistakable royal seal pressed deep into expensive paper. Henry stared at it from across his kitchen table in Montecito, the California sun streaming through windows that had once felt like freedom. Now, holding this formal summons from a world he'd left behind, those same windows felt like barriers keeping him from something unfinished. Meghan watched him over her coffee cup, her dark eyes reading the tension in his shoulders. "You don't have to open it," she said quietly. "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." But he did. The invitation was written in the formal language that had governed his entire childhood, each word precisely chosen to convey both honor and obligation. His Majesty King Charles III cordially invites Prince Harry to participate in the Royal Foundation's Global Unity broadcast, celebrating the monarchy's charitable initiatives and commitment to healing division. "Unity," Henry muttered, setting the card down. "They want unity." The event was scheduled for live broadcast from Buckingham Palace in 3 weeks, a 2-hour special featuring interviews with royal family members, celebrity endorsements, and what the invitation described as candid conversations about moving forward together. The final line made his stomach clench. This represents an opportunity for reconciliation and renewal of family bonds. His phone buzzed. William's number. "You got it?" his brother's voice said without preamble when Henry answered. "I got something." Henry walked to the window, watching his daughter play in the garden with her nanny. "Question is, what exactly I got?" "It's legitimate, Harry. Father wants to extend an olive branch. The whole family does." The formality in William's voice, calling Charles father instead of dad, told Henry everything about which side of this conversation his brother was really on. But there was something else underneath, a careful modulation that suggested William was choosing his words for an audience beyond this phone call. "Since when does the family extend olive branches on live television?" Harry asked. "Since you decided to air our business on television first." The words came out sharper than William seemed to intend. A pause. "Look, this is your chance to reset, to show the world that we're still family, despite everything." Despite everything. As if Henry's departure from royal life had been a tantrum rather than survival. As if the reasons he'd left, the manipulation, the control, the sacrifice of his wife's mental health for the institution's image were mere misunderstandings that could be solved with a carefully choreographed television appearance. "Who else knows I was invited?" Harry asked. "The immediate family, the production team, palace security." "That's not what I meant." Another pause. "Harry, if you're looking for conspiracy where there isn't one, you'll find it. This is straightforward. Come home, sit with us, show the world we can be in the same room without drama. Everyone benefits." After William hung up, Henry sat in his study staring at the invitation. Meghan found him there an hour later, turning the heavy paper over in his hands like it might reveal hidden text. "What does your gut tell you?" she asked, settling into the chair across from his desk. "I think it's a trap." "Then don't go." But it wasn't that simple. For all his public declarations of independence, for all the interviews and memoirs and careful construction of a life outside the royal machine, Henry still felt the gravitational pull of belonging. The family he'd been born into remained, in some cellular way, home, and home was calling. "What if they mean it?" he said. What if this really is their way of trying to make things right? Meghan's expression was gentle but skeptical. When has your family ever made things right quietly? Why does reconciliation need cameras? That afternoon, an encrypted message appeared on Henry's secure phone, a number he recognized but hadn't heard from in 2 years. Sarah Callahan, his former press secretary who'd left the palace under mysterious circumstances just before Henry's own departure. "We need to talk, not over phones. The botanical garden near your place, tomorrow at 3. Come alone." Henry almost deleted it. Sarah had been part of the machine, skilled at manipulating narratives and managing crises. But she'd also been the one person in the palace who'd seemed genuinely disturbed by some of the strategies employed to protect the crown's image. Her sudden departure had raised questions no one would answer. The Santa Barbara Botanical Garden was nearly empty on a Wednesday afternoon. Henry found Sarah on a bench near the desert section, surrounded by cactus and the kind of California silence that felt like held breath. "You're thinking about going," she said when he sat down. "How did you—" "Because I know how this works. They send the invitation, then William calls with just the right mix of family obligation and wounded disappointment. Then you spend days telling yourself maybe this time is different." Henry studied her face. "You know about the broadcast." "I know about a lot of things." She pulled a tablet from her bag, then thought better of it, putting it back. "Harry, you need to understand something. That invitation isn't about reconciliation. It's about control. Specifically, it's about regaining control of your narrative." "My narrative?" "You've been talking, telling your story your way. That's been problematic for certain interests. The broadcast is designed to fix that problem." The weight of her words settled between them like smoke. Henry had spent years learning to recognize manipulation, but this felt different, more sophisticated. "Who's behind it?" Harry asked. Sarah glanced around the empty garden paths. "People with more power than just the royal family. People who understand that modern monarchy isn't about politics anymore. It's about psychology, about managing how people feel, what they believe, how they process trauma and grief." She stood to leave, then turned back. "Harry, if you go, be ready for anything. And Harry, don't go alone in your head. They'll use your isolation against you." That evening, Henry called his security team to discuss logistics for London travel. He told himself it was just preparation, keeping options open. But as he outlined arrival procedures and accommodation requirements, he knew he'd already decided. Meghan didn't try to dissuade him. Instead, she helped him prepare, running through potential questions and scenarios with the thoroughness of someone who understood that love sometimes meant supporting dangerous choices. "Promise me something," she said the night before his departure. "Promise me that if it feels wrong, even for a second, you'll walk away."
"I promise." But as his plane lifted off from LAX, Henry wondered if he'd recognize wrong in time to escape it. The royal family had raised him in a world where manipulation was called tradition, where control was called love, and where the most dangerous traps were set by people who claimed they were protecting you. The invitation in his carry-on bag felt heavier with each mile toward London, as if it were gaining mass from the weight of history, expectation, and whatever truth Sarah Callahan hadn't been willing to speak aloud. The BBC studios in White City hummed with the particular energy that comes when global attention focuses on a single room. Prince Henry stood in the green marble corridor outside Studio One, adjusting the cufflinks on his navy suit. No military decorations, no royal insignia, just the clean lines of a man who'd learned to dress for himself rather than an institution. Through the soundproofed walls, he could hear the murmur of the live audience being seated. 300 carefully selected guests, charity leaders, Commonwealth representatives, and what the production notes had diplomatically called media partners. Everyone who mattered in the ecosystem that sustained the modern monarchy. 5 minutes, Your Highness, a production assistant said, then caught herself. Sorry, Prince Harry, 5 minutes. The correction stung more than it should have. Even here, even now, his status remained ambiguous, too royal to be ordinary, too exiled to be fully royal. It was exactly the kind of liminal space where mistakes were made. George Stephanopoulos appeared at his elbow, impeccably groomed and radiating the careful warmth that had made him America's most trusted interviewer. Ready for this, Harry? As ready as anyone can be for family therapy on live television. George's laugh was genuine but brief. It's not therapy, it's an opportunity. Your father specifically requested this format because he wanted something more intimate than a press conference, more authentic than prepared statements. The phrase, your father, instead of His Majesty, was clearly intentional, designed to remind Henry of familial rather than institutional obligations. Another small manipulation, skillfully deployed. They walked together toward the studio entrance, past walls lined with photographs of historic broadcasts, Churchill's wartime speeches, the Queen's Jubilee addresses, Diana's panorama interview. That last image made Henry pause. His mother, eyes direct and vulnerable, speaking truths that had shattered the careful fiction of royal perfection. Second thoughts? George asked. Always. The studio was smaller than Henry had expected, designed to feel intimate despite the dozen cameras and banks of lights. The set resembled a palace drawing room. Antique furniture, carefully arranged flowers, portraits of past monarchs creating a backdrop of continuity and tradition. Everything calculated to remind viewers and participants that this family was also an institution, this conversation also statecraft. King Charles sat in the central chair, looking every inch the sovereign in his perfectly tailored charcoal suit. His posture was erect but not rigid, his expression composed but warming as he caught sight of Henry. For a moment, father and son regarded each other across the gulf that 3 years of separation had carved between them. Henry, Charles rose, extending his arms in what the cameras would capture as a gesture of paternal affection. The embrace was brief but seemed genuine, though Henry felt the slight stiffness that suggested performance alongside emotion. Camilla watched from her chair, smiling with the practiced warmth that had taken decades to perfect. She'd learned, through years of public scrutiny and private determination, how to project maternal concern without overstepping the complex boundaries of being a stepmother to grown men who'd lost their mother too young. Prince William stood beside the set, his own posture conveying the controlled tension of someone fulfilling duty while managing personal discomfort. When their eyes met, Henry saw something he couldn't quite decode. Sympathy, perhaps, or warning. Maybe both. Places, everyone, the director called. Live in 90 seconds. Henry took his assigned seat, directly across from Charles, with George positioned between them as both mediator and interrogator. The placement was strategic. Father and son would have to look at each other, but any direct confrontation would be filtered through George's professional neutrality. The studio lights intensified, and Henry felt the familiar weight of performance settling on his shoulders. This was what he'd been trained for since childhood, being watched, being judged, representing something larger than himself. The irony wasn't lost on him that he'd traveled 5,000 miles to escape this feeling, only to voluntarily walk back into it. 30 seconds, someone called. Charles leaned forward slightly. Thank you for coming, my son. This means more than you know. The words were quiet, probably inaudible to the microphones, but Henry heard them clearly. There was something in his father's voice, genuine emotion beneath the careful control, that made Henry's chest tighten with an old, familiar longing for approval. 10 seconds. Red lights blinked on. Cameras moved into position. In homes and offices around the world, millions of screens flickered to the opening graphics. Royal Foundation Global Unity Broadcast, a family conversation. George's smile was perfect as he looked directly into camera one. Good evening. I'm George Stephanopoulos, and tonight we have the extraordinary privilege of sitting down with His Majesty King Charles III and Prince Harry for an intimate conversation about family, service, and the future of the Commonwealth. The camera pulled back to reveal the three men, and Henry felt the familiar disorientation of being simultaneously himself and a character named Prince Harry, playing out personal drama for public consumption. Your Majesty, George began, you've described this evening as an opportunity for healing. What did you mean by that? Charles's voice carried the measured cadence of a man who'd spent decades choosing his words carefully. Family relationships, like all meaningful connections, require constant attention and care. When there have been misunderstandings or hurt feelings, the path forward requires courage from everyone involved. The courage to listen, to forgive, and to prioritize love over pride. It was beautifully said and completely empty of specific meaning. Classic Charles. Acknowledge conflict without admitting fault, express sentiment without accepting responsibility. George turned to Henry. Prince Harry, you've spoken publicly about feeling misunderstood by your family. How do you respond to your father's call for courage and forgiveness? This was the moment Henry had dreaded and anticipated in equal measure. The cameras were tight on his face, capturing every micro-expression for analysis by millions of strangers. In his peripheral vision, he could see William watching intently, Camilla maintaining her composed smile, and Charles waiting with the particular stillness of someone who'd already decided what answer he wanted to hear. Courage and forgiveness are exactly what brought me here, Henry said finally. But they have to flow both directions. It takes courage to speak difficult truths, and it takes forgiveness to hear them without retaliation. George nodded thoughtfully. And what truths do you think need to be spoken tonight? Before Henry could answer, Charles interjected with the slight smile he used when redirecting conversations away from uncomfortable territory. Perhaps we could start with what we agree on, George. Harry's work with veterans, his commitment to mental health advocacy, his dedication to his family. These are values we share, foundations we can build on. It was smoothly done, acknowledging Henry's work while subtly claiming credit for the values that motivated it. The implication was clear. Whatever good Henry had accomplished was an extension of his royal upbringing, not a rejection of it. Henry felt the familiar frustration rising, the sense of being managed rather than heard, but he'd learned, through years of therapy and hard-won self-awareness, to recognize manipulation even when it came wrapped in paternal approval. I appreciate that, Pa, he said, using the childhood name deliberately. But I think the audience deserves honesty about why reconciliation has been necessary in the first place. Something flickered across Charles's face, surprise, perhaps, or annoyance at the script deviation. In the control room, Henry knew producers were making rapid decisions about camera angles and audio levels, trying to capture drama without letting it spiral into disaster. George leaned forward, sensing the story shifting beneath the careful surface. What kind of honesty, Prince Harry? And in that moment, Henry made a choice that would change everything. Instead of offering the expected platitudes about family misunderstandings and media pressure, he looked directly into the camera and said, "The kind of honesty that asks why a family needs a global television broadcast to have a private conversation. The kind that questions whether this evening is about healing or something else entirely." The studio went very quiet. Even the camera operators seemed to still, as if the entire production had taken a collective breath. Charles's composure never wavered, but Henry caught the barely perceptible tightening around his father's eyes, the look he'd seen countless times as a child when he'd asked the wrong question or challenged the wrong assumption. "Something else, Harry?" George asked carefully. "Performance, management, control." The silence stretched for 3 heartbeats, an eternity in live television. Then Charles cleared his throat with the gentle authority of someone redirecting a conversation that had wandered into forbidden territory. "Harry, I think perhaps the stress of this evening—" "Actually," George interrupted, and something in his tone made Henry's skin prickle with warning. "Before we continue, I think our viewers would benefit from some context about Prince Harry's recent statements." This was not in the script. Henry was certain of that. The carefully planned conversation was supposed to focus on reconciliation and shared values, not whatever George was about to unleash. But the interviewer was already turning to face a monitor that had descended from the studio ceiling. "With your permission, Your Majesty, I'd like to show some footage that provides important background for tonight's discussion." Charles nodded, though Henry caught a flicker of uncertainty in his father's eyes. Whatever was about to happen, Charles wasn't entirely prepared for it either. The monitor flickered to life, and Henry's own voice filled the studio. "They're not interested in the truth. They're interested in protecting an image, even if that image destroys the people who have to live behind it." Henry's stomach turned to ice. The footage was real. He remembered the conversation, remembered his frustration and pain. But how had they obtained it, and more importantly, who had authorized its use in this setting? He looked at Charles, searching for some sign that his father was as surprised as this ambush as he was. But Charles's expression had shifted from warmth to something harder, more distant. The look of a monarch dealing with a crisis rather than a father protecting his son. Henry began, then stopped. His throat felt closed, his breathing shallow. This was exactly the kind of public humiliation he'd feared, the weaponization of his private moments for institutional purposes. "Perhaps we could discuss how private pain sometimes leads to public statements that don't reflect our true feelings." Her tone was compassionate, but Henry recognized the strategy. Position him as emotionally unstable, his criticisms as the product of personal trauma rather than legitimate concerns. George wasn't finished. "There's more," he said, advancing the footage. This time the screen showed Henry in conversation with someone off camera, a voice Henry recognized with growing horror as Sarah Callahan, though her face wasn't visible. The timestamp showed this was from 2 days ago, their meeting in the botanical garden. "You need to understand something," Sarah's voice said through the studio speakers. "That invitation isn't about reconciliation. It's about control." Henry's recorded response: "My narrative? You've been talking, telling your story your way. That's been problematic for certain interests." The footage cut to Henry nodding, looking paranoid and conspiratorial as he absorbed Sarah's warnings about psychological manipulation and narrative control. George paused again. "Prince Harry, this conversation took place just 48 hours ago. You came here tonight knowing, or at least believing, that this event was designed to manipulate you. Why did you come anyway?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. Every person in that studio, every viewer around the world was now watching Henry struggle with the implications of his own secretly recorded words. William stepped forward from his position at the edge of the set. "Harry," he said quietly, "I think you should know—"
"William." Charles's voice cut across his eldest son's words with quiet authority. "Not now." But William continued, his face etched with an expression Henry had never seen before, guilt mixed with something that looked almost like grief. "The security footage from your home, the garden meeting, it wasn't obtained illegally. You authorized the surveillance yourself, years ago, as part of your personal protection protocols. Henry stared at his brother, the words not making sense. What are you talking about? The security company that monitors your California property, William continued, each word seeming to cause him pain. Duxton Security Services. They're a subsidiary of Voss Digital Analytics, which has contracts with the Crown Estate for consultation services. The names meant nothing to Henry, but the implication was becoming clear. His own security company, chosen by him, paid by him, trusted to protect his family, had been feeding surveillance data to corporate partners with ties to the royal family. George leaned forward, his journalist instincts recognizing a story within the story. Prince Harry, are you saying you weren't aware that your private conversations were being monitored? Henry's voice came out as barely a whisper. The betrayal was so complete, so sophisticated that his mind struggled to process it. Not only had his family orchestrated this public ambush, but they'd used his own security arrangements to gather the ammunition. Charles finally spoke, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. Harry, I think perhaps we should take a break. Sarah Callahan waited in the hotel bar, her hands trembling around a whiskey glass. When Henry arrived, she slid an encrypted drive across the table. Voss Digital Analytics. They've been running psychological experiments since Diana's death. Your grief was data, Harry. Your daughter's already in their system. Dr. Felix Craven met Henry in a Vienna safe house, paranoid and broken. Project Lilibet. We conditioned your trauma responses, measured your public breakdowns. The monarchy contracted us to perfect grief manipulation. Now they're testing it on entire populations through social media algorithms. I knew, William admitted during their confrontation in Kensington Gardens, about the surveillance, the experiments, Eleanor Voss. But choosing you means choosing exile from everything we were born to protect. His voice cracked. I'm sorry, Harry. I'm not brave enough to join your revolution. Maya Trenholm verified every document Henry provided. This goes beyond royal drama, she said, studying the files. Voss Analytics has government contracts across 12 countries. They're weaponizing trauma for crowd control. We need to broadcast this before they activate the next phase of testing. Eleanor Voss smiled coldly across her corporate boardroom table. Your mother's death taught us how grief could unite a nation. Your daughter will teach us how to fracture one. But cooperate with us, and she might escape the fate we planned for her. Henry hijacked the royal family's next live event, uploading Craven's evidence to every screen worldwide. They turned our pain into their power, he declared as palace security stormed the studio. Today, we take our stories back. The monarchy's carefully constructed image crumbled in real time across global media. Months later, Henry held his daughter in their California garden, watching news of Eleanor Voss's arrest. William had quietly testified against the crown's contracts. Charles faced abdication calls. They taught me to fear my voice, he whispered to his child. I'm teaching you to trust yours.
Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.